The air was thick with tension, and the audience inside the studio sensed something unusual long before it unfolded. Jimmy Fallon, known for his playful tone and lighthearted interviews, leaned across his desk with that trademark grin, but the guest sitting across from him wasn't in the mood for games. Donald Trump had arrived at The Tonight Show ready to promote himself, but what happened instead turned into one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history. The evening began with laughter, the kind that usually follows Fallon's quirky impressions and harmless banter. But soon the mood shifted. What was supposed to be a breezy conversation spiraled into a fiery back and forth that ended with Trump storming off the set in front of a stunned live audience. Trump is no stranger to confrontation, but viewers had never seen him bristle quite like this on national television. Fallon at first treated the interview the way he always does, sprinkling in jokes, tossing softballs, letting the conversation drift into silly territory. But Trump wasn't laughing. His arms were crossed, his jaw clenched, and the energy in the room grew awkwardly sharp. Fallon tried to poke fun at Trump's hairstyle, something he's done countless times before, but this time Trump wasn't in the mood to play along. He fired back, dismissing the joke as tired and accusing Fallon of being part of the problem. The audience gasped, not because of the insult, but because of the sudden seriousness that followed. Fallon, perhaps realizing the atmosphere was slipping, shifted gears. He asked Trump about recent controversies, something Fallon typically avoids because his brand thrives on lighthearted escapism rather than political grilling. But that pivot seemed to ignite something even deeper. Trump bristled at every question, cutting Fallon off mid-sentence, waving his hands dismissively and accusing the show of trying to ambush him. Fallon's smile tightened into something more strained. For the first time, the easygoing host looked cornered, struggling to maintain control of his stage as the crowd leaned forward, caught in the middle of a late-night exchange that felt less like entertainment and more like a battleground. The breaking point came when Fallon pressed Trump on his polarizing speeches. Fallon framed the question carefully, asking if Trump ever worried about the long-term effect of his rhetoric on younger generations watching at home. It wasn't the most aggressive question, but it was enough to spark an eruption. Trump's face reddened as he leaned forward and slammed his palm on Fallon's desk. His voice thundered through the studio, accusing Fallon of playing into the fake news narrative and of pretending to be a comedian when you're just another puppet for the left. The audience, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent, sat frozen. Fallon, visibly shaken, tried to de-escalate, but the words were already out and Trump wasn't backing down. For a man who thrives on commanding the stage, Trump's next move stunned even his most devoted supporters. Without waiting for Fallon's response, he ripped off his microphone, tossed it onto the desk, and stood up. Fallon, caught off guard, tried to extend a hand to calm him down, but Trump turned his back. The cameras caught every second as he marched off stage, his suit jacket flapping behind him, leaving Fallon stranded in front of a shocked audience. The band stopped playing mid-riff, unsure whether to cue the next segment or let the moment breathe. The tension was electric, and it lingered long after Trump disappeared behind the curtain. What followed was pure late-night chaos. Fallon, usually quick on his feet with a joke to break the ice, sat there for a moment staring into the void. He stammered, forcing a nervous laugh, and tried to lighten the mood by joking about how that wasn't part of the script. The audience gave him a sympathetic round of applause, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. Fallon eventually pivoted back to his usual antics, but the shadow of what just happened hovered over every remaining segment of the show. Social media exploded before the episode even finished airing. Hashtags related to the walkout began trending, clips circulated across platforms, and armchair pundits dissected the moment as if it were a political debate rather than a late-night interview gone awry. What made the moment so seismic was not just Trump storming off, it was where it happened. Fallon has never been a hard-hitting interviewer. Unlike Colbert, Kimmel, or even Myers, Fallon avoids confrontation. His charm lies in silly games, musical skits, and keeping conversations light. For Trump to combust on Fallon's stage, of all places, signaled just how combustible the former president had become. It wasn't a cable news host challenging him with hard questions. It wasn't a political rival sparring with him on policy. It was Fallon, the same guy who lip-syncs pop songs and plays Pictionary with celebrities, who somehow provoked one of the most dramatic exits of Trump's public career. In the hours that followed, Commentators argued about who was at fault. Some insisted Fallon crossed a line by steering into political territory when Trump expected softball questions. Others argued Trump's reaction revealed a fragile ego unable to withstand even the gentlest prodding. Supporters defended him, framing the moment as yet another example of a rigged media trying to set him up. Critics pounced, calling the walkout childish and unpresidential. Fallon himself kept quiet, aside from a brief statement backstage that the show didn't expect things to go that way. Insiders later revealed that producers scrambled in real time to figure out how to fill the gap left by Trump's early exit, cutting to commercials and improvising segments that hadn't been planned. The fallout extended beyond that night. The incident dominated headlines, overshadowing other news, and raising questions about whether late-night hosts should adjust their approach when dealing with figures like Trump. Fallon, often criticized for being too soft on controversial figures, suddenly found himself in the spotlight for being the first to push Trump hard enough that he snapped. For Trump, the clip of him storming off circulated endlessly, played in loops on television, dissected in online forums, and replayed in memes across the internet. Some framed it as a sign of weakness, others as proof that he refuses to play the clown for Hollywood elites. In truth, the walkout became more than just a late-night blooper. It symbolized the growing divide between politics and entertainment, where every appearance, every exchange, every soundbite is weaponized for broader cultural battles. Fallon wanted laughs. Trump wanted control. Neither got what they came for, and the clash in expectations detonated into one unforgettable moment. It was a reminder that even on a stage built for fun and games, the raw friction of American politics can explode without warning, turning laughter into silence, and leaving a shocked audience staring at an empty chair where a guest once sat. By the time the credits rolled that night, one thing was clear. Viewers hadn't just watched another late-night interview. They had witnessed a cultural flashpoint, one that would echo in conversations for days, weeks, and maybe even years to come. Donald Trump had stormed off The Tonight Show, but in doing so, he left behind a scene so dramatic, so unexpected, that it carved itself into television history. The next morning, America woke up to a firestorm. Clips of Trump storming off Jimmy Fallon's show ran on every news outlet, from cable news panels dissecting the blowup to local morning shows looping the footage with anchors shaking their heads in disbelief. On social media, the video became unavoidable. Trending hashtags, slowed down replays, memes with dramatic music overlays, and countless hot takes. Some edited the moment into GIFs of Trump throwing down his microphone. Others spliced it into montages comparing him to other celebrities who had famously walked off interviews. It wasn't just a late-night spat anymore, it was a cultural event. Political analysts pounced on it immediately. Some claimed it revealed Trump's inability to handle even the most harmless criticism, arguing that if he couldn't endure Jimmy Fallon's jokes, he had no business handling global crises. Others insisted it was part of a strategy, that Trump deliberately created a viral moment to reframe himself as a fighter who refuses to be mocked or cornered. Regardless of the motive, the optics of the walkout were impossible to ignore. The image of Fallon staring into the camera, nervously chuckling after his guest bolted, captured perfectly the tension between comedy and politics in modern America. Fallon's team scrambled to respond. Behind the scenes, producers huddled for hours after the taping, unsure how much of the confrontation to air. Cutting it entirely would look like a cover-up. Airing it in full risked accusations of exploitation. Ultimately, NBC decided to show it nearly uncut, reasoning that viewers had already seen it through shaky phone footage online. By the time the official broadcast hit screens, the rawness of the moment had already cemented itself in the public imagination. Fallon himself opened the next night's show with a self-deprecating joke about needing a sturdier desk if people keep slamming it, but his delivery lacked the usual buoyancy. His laughter felt thinner, as if he too realized he'd stepped into a new, more dangerous territory. Meanwhile, Trump wasted no time weaponizing the incident. Within hours of the broadcast, he was on social media blasting Fallon as a lightweight clown and accusing NBC of staging the ambush. His posts claimed that Fallon had begged him to appear, only to turn on him once the cameras were rolling. Supporters rallied behind him, flooding Fallon's pages with criticism and praising Trump for refusing to play along. For them, the walkout wasn't weakness, it was defiance. The sight of Trump ripping off his microphone became a rallying symbol, proof that he wouldn't let himself be turned into late-night comedy fodder. But critics saw the opposite. Editorials in major newspapers framed the meltdown as a glimpse into Trump's thin skin. They pointed out that Fallon's questions were mild compared to the grilling he would have faced on shows like Colbert or Kimmel. If such gentle prodding triggered a storm-off, what did that say about his temperament? Opinion writers leaned into the narrative, branding the walkout a meltdown in prime time. Even comedians piled on. Other late-night hosts gleefully replayed the footage, riffing on it with monologues that mocked both Fallon for finally showing a backbone and Trump for bolting under pressure. What struck many viewers was how unscripted it all felt. In an era when everything in entertainment seems carefully choreographed, the chaos of that night stood out. The awkward silence after Trump left, Fallon's fumbling attempts to recover, the stunned audience unsure whether to clap or boo, it all carried an authenticity that was both uncomfortable and riveting. People weren't just watching television. They were witnessing an eruption of real human conflict. The usual glossy wall between celebrity and viewer had cracked, revealing raw emotion underneath. The incident also sparked broader debates about the role of late-night television. For decades, hosts like Johnny Carson, Jay Leno, and even Fallon himself had been seen primarily as entertainers. But the Trump era blurred those lines. Colbert leaned hard into political satire. Kimmel addressed social issues with surprising sincerity. And Fallon, who had long resisted that shift, suddenly found himself pulled into the fray. Commentators asked, should Fallon have pressed Trump harder? Should he have backed off entirely? Or was the entire fiasco inevitable the moment politics and comedy collided on a stage built for laughter? Behind the curtain, staffers described the atmosphere as surreal. Stagehands whispered that they had never seen a guest leave so abruptly, let alone a former president. The Roots, Fallon's house band, reportedly froze mid-song when Trump left, unsure whether to continue playing. Fallon himself was said to be shaken afterward, pacing backstage and questioning whether he had made a mistake in pushing Trump too far. One crew member recalled him muttering, "I'm not Colbert, I don't do this," as if reassuring himself that he hadn't meant to ignite a confrontation. Yet, as shocking as the exit was, it also brought Fallon something unexpected: relevance. For years, critics had derided him as the safe late-night host, too focused on games and impressions, too unwilling to engage with the real world. That night, whether by accident or design, Fallon had sparked a cultural earthquake. People who hadn't watched his show in years were suddenly tuning in, curious about the host who had driven Trump off his stage. Ratings spiked. Clips racked up millions of views online. Fallon, once dismissed as background noise in the late-night wars, was suddenly the headline act. Trump, too, benefited in his own way. His brand thrives on chaos, on moments where he can frame himself as the victim of media hostility. The walkout gave him a fresh grievance to wield, a story to retell at rallies, a viral clip to reinforce his narrative. "They tried to humiliate me," he declared days later to a cheering crowd. "But I walked out. I don't need them, I have you." The audience roared, and the walkout became less a stumble than a rallying cry. What made the whole saga unforgettable was the sheer unpredictability of it. No one had expected sparks on Fallon's stage, least of all Fallon himself. But in that unpredictability lay the power of the moment. It reminded viewers that despite all the scripting, all the planning, all the polished entertainment of modern television, live interactions still carry the potential to detonate into something raw and uncontainable. By the end of the week, the world had moved on to the next controversy, as it always does. Yet the clip remained etched in pop culture, replayed whenever people spoke of Trump's temper or Fallon's accidental foray into hardball. It was more than just a walkout. It was a collision of worlds. Entertainment, politics, ego, and spectacle, crashing together under the bright lights of late-night television. And for those who watched it unfold live, there was no forgetting that split second when the laughter died. The stage fell silent and a former president stormed off into history, leaving behind only an empty chair and the echo of stunned disbelief. The storm didn't fade in a matter of days, it deepened. What many thought would be a one-week media frenzy stretched into weeks of relentless coverage. By the second weekend after Trump's walkout, political talk shows were still replaying the clip, inserting it into montages of other explosive exits, and dissecting every second of Fallon's reaction. Entire panels debated whether Fallon's nervous chuckle had been embarrassment, relief, or thinly disguised fear. Some critics labeled it the moment Fallon lost control of his own show. Others framed it as the exact point when he shed his softball reputation and, for once, poked a political giant hard enough to sting. Trump, of course, wasn't letting it go. At his rallies, he began weaving the Fallon walkout into his stump speeches, treating it like folklore. "Did you see what happened? Weak little Jimmy tried to play tough," he boomed to roaring applause. "He begged me to be there and then he tried to set me up. Total ambush. And I don't take ambushes, I walk out." The crowd ate it up. The moment was reframed not as an embarrassing retreat, but as a show of dominance, proof that he refused to be a prop in someone else's comedy sketch. Supporters waved homemade signs with slogans like "Walked out strong" and "Don't play their game." Media outlets noted how Trump spun the fiasco into a narrative about Hollywood elitism. He portrayed Fallon as a symbol of the out-of-touch entertainment class that sneers at everyday Americans. By turning the incident into a rallying cry, he transformed a loss of composure into political capital. He wasn't the man who stormed off in anger. He was the man who refused to be mocked. And for millions who already distrusted late-night television, that framing resonated. Meanwhile, Fallon was caught in a bind. For years, critics had hammered him for his infamous 2016 hair-tousling moment, saying he normalized Trump when other hosts were holding him accountable. This time, though, Fallon found himself accused of the opposite, pushing too far. His attempt at balancing comedy with pointed questions left both sides unsatisfied. Some viewers praised him for finally standing up to Trump. Others blasted him for mishandling the moment and letting the interview spin out of control. Fallon's staff bristled at the criticism, insisting he hadn't planned to ambush Trump at all, that the interview had simply gone off the rails. But the public had already made up its mind. Fallon, intentionally or not, had stepped into the political minefield. Behind closed doors at NBC, executives were split. Ratings had skyrocketed after the walkout, drawing in audiences who hadn't tuned into Fallon in years. In pure numbers, the incident was a gift. But NBC is cautious by nature, wary of alienating large swaths of viewers. Some higher-ups feared that leaning into politics would ruin Fallon's carefully cultivated brand as the fun-loving, apolitical host. Others argued that the viral moment proved he had more cultural relevance than anyone gave him credit for, and that maybe it was time for Fallon to embrace a sharper edge. Fallon himself seemed uneasy with the idea. He wasn't Colbert or Kimmel. He thrived in silliness, not confrontation, and yet the world was demanding that he pick a side. The fallout also spilled into the wider entertainment industry. Other celebrities began weighing in, some defending Fallon, others mocking Trump. Late-night rival Stephen Colbert delivered a biting monologue. "Trump walking out on Jimmy Fallon is like storming out of Candyland because you lost a turn." Seth Meyers, who once shared the SNL stage with Fallon, called the walkout the first time Jimmy's ever hosted a guest who didn't want to play a game. Even comedians outside the late-night circle chimed in, turning the incident into fodder for stand-up routines and social media jabs. But perhaps the most interesting development came from viewers themselves. Online, two parallel narratives hardened. On one side, memes portrayed Trump as thin-skinned, fleeing from harmless jokes, sometimes edited with cartoon sound effects or dramatic opera music. On the other side, pro-Trump accounts remixed the footage to show him striding out like a hero, splicing in triumphant music and captions like a man who walks away from fake laughter. Both versions spread like wildfire, each reinforcing the worldview of the audience that shared it. What had started as a simple walkout became a mirror for America's cultural divide, interpreted in opposite ways depending on political allegiance. Weeks later, Fallon was still being asked about the incident in interviews. He tried to downplay it, shrugging off questions with forced humor. "Hey, at least he didn't flip my desk over, right?" he joked during one radio appearance. But the strain showed. Insiders whispered that Fallon hated being dragged into political controversy again, haunted by how much backlash he had endured after the 2016 election. He reportedly told friends, "I just want to make people laugh. I didn't sign up for this." But no matter how much he tried to steer back toward harmless celebrity games, The shadow of the walkout loomed. Trump, in contrast, leaned into it more with each passing week. His campaign released a fundraising email featuring a freeze frame of him ripping off the microphone, accompanied by the slogan, "I won't be silenced." Donors flooded the campaign with contributions, proving that the viral clip had real-world consequences. Strategists even began using the incident as an example of media traps Trump had supposedly outsmarted. In the alternate reality Trump constructed, walking out was not retreat, it was victory. Historians and media scholars soon weighed in, placing the moment in a broader context. They argued that it exemplified the dangerous merger of entertainment and politics. Decades earlier, a celebrity storming off a talk show might have been a quirky headline, quickly forgotten. But in the era of social media amplification and 24-hour news cycles, such moments became cultural flashpoints. The Fallon-Trump debacle wasn't just late-night gossip. It was a symbol of how fractured the American conversation had become, where even a comedy interview could ignite partisan warfare. And yet, for all the think pieces and analysis, what most people remembered was the sheer absurdity of it. A late-night host known for lip-sync battles had accidentally triggered one of the most powerful men in the world into a very public meltdown. The juxtaposition was surreal, almost cartoonish. Viewers replayed it not because they needed to understand the politics, but because they couldn't believe it happened at all. By the end of the month, the clip had reached legendary status. It was parodied on Saturday Night Live, immortalized in endless memes, and debated on every corner of the internet. Fallon tried to move on, retreating into safer territory with celebrity sketches and games. Trump continued to use it as a talking point at rallies, painting himself as the man who walked away from the circus. The truth was more complicated, but truth had little to do with it anymore. What mattered was the spectacle, the image, the clip. The moment burned into collective memory. Long after the dust settled, the incident remained one of those cultural reference points people could invoke with a single phrase. Remember when Trump stormed off Fallon? It needed no further explanation. Everyone knew. Everyone remembered the awkward silence, the slammed desk, the sudden walkout. It was more than television. It was history disguised as comedy, and comedy that accidentally revealed history.